So, two things. Firstly, there are quite a few books that I read in June that I have never talked about yet because I actually ended up doing the mid-year book tag check-in thing instead of a June wrap-up. Secondly, I didn't really read much in July, so if I did just a July wrap-up video, it would be really short. So I have decided to combine my June and July wrap-ups into one video that's kind of a mid-summer wrap-up what I've been reading so far. We've got a wrinkly sweatshirt, a heart full of dreams, and 9 books to talk about. So let's get into it. The first book that I read in June was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. This is a debut novel for this author, and it came out this year in 2024. I think it was in January, but I'm not 100% sure. This book is hefty. This is an extremely ambitious debut novel. I don't know if I've seen something this thick from a first-time author, honestly. Let me tell you, it's not the easiest read in the world. This is a fantasy novel, and I actually really loved the magic system in this. Basically, we are in a world where there are elemental gods that give their elemental gifts to certain chosen people in this world, which is not very uncommon. I feel like there are plenty of books where that kind of is the setting. But what is different about this one and kind of the method for the magic is something that I've never read before, and it felt really unique to me. People can hear the songs of the gods, or the creators as they're called, and if you can hear a specific song, it means that you're able to learn the language of the god, learn the song of the god, and be able to use their magic. So you could be connected to the fire god or the water god, or there's a wind one. There's quite a few, and if you hear their song, you can use their magic. You can also hear multiple gods, but it's most common that you either hear one or two. This is also a very politically turbulent world. There are many kings that are all related, and they're brothers, and they absolutely hate each other. It kind of feels like a political fantasy more than a traditional fantasy with like action or magic. It's just kind of a magical setting that mostly takes place in a political plotline. So we follow our main character, Rave, who actually works with a rebel group who are trying to overthrow some of these kingdoms because there's stuff going on that people don't like. So Rave is our main character, and her counterpart is Khan, who is actually the king of one of these kingdoms, and they are kind of forced together through a series of events and start to realize that maybe they're a little bit more connected than they had originally thought, and that their pasts are more intertwined than they had thought. And there's dragons in it, which is really cool. The magic is really cool. The world is really cool and unique. Overall, I actually super enjoyed this book. I will say that it's very ambitious. It is really dense. It's a bit confusing at times. I had to really focus and pay attention and reread some stuff in order to fully comprehend it. There were a lot of things that I loved about it. I loved the characters. Like I said, I loved the magic in the world and the setting. There were some things that felt like they could have used some serious editing. I think that there were plenty of settings and scenes that were just way too long and didn't really feel like they moved the plot along. But then there were extremely action-packed, exciting moments where I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time. So it was very kind of up and down, but with the underlying foundation of this is actually a really cool world. This is, again, a debut novel, and I always tend to give a little bit more grace towards debut novels just because it's amazing that they're able to put something out at all. So I think that's really cool. I think that what she accomplished here in this book is definitely an amazing feat. Again, I think perhaps she bit off a little bit more than she could chew in some areas, but I'm really excited for the next book. I'm not sure if this is going to be a trilogy or a duology. It's called the Moonfall series, so I feel like there's a couple more books planned, and I'm excited about it. However, I think that I will forget a lot of what happens in this book by the time the second book comes around, because again, it's just such a dense and complicated book in some areas. So I already have a little bit of the stress and anxiety of really wanting to read the second book, but knowing that I'm going to have to jog my memory somehow with this book, whether it's a synopsis or a YouTube video. If somebody wants to put out a YouTube video that just fully explains the plot of this book, It was great. I rated this a 4 with the anticipation of where the series could eventually go. The next book that I read was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I'm not sure how to say his last name. I apologize if I'm butchering it. This is a classic book, I think, in the psychological thriller genres. I've never read it before. I didn't even fully intend to pick it up anytime soon, just because, as I've stated in a couple other videos, I'm not a huge mystery thriller psychological fan, but I have started to get into it a little bit more recently. But this was a pick from the book club that I'm a part of with my friends and my sisters, and this was somebody else's pick, so it was a great push to get me to read something like this. This follows Alicia, who is a pretty famous painter, and she basically goes mad and murders her husband and then never speaks again and is put in a psych ward. So the story picks up actually from the perspective of her psychotherapist, whose name is Theo. And the book follows Theo as he is basically trying to treat Alicia, figure out what happened, figure out why she doesn't speak anymore. And while he is treating her and trying to help her get better, he kind of develops an unhealthy obsession with it, which then makes other things in his life start to suffer. His marriage starts to suffer, his relationships start to suffer because he is so hyper-focused on Alicia and her problems. There is a very significant twist at the end of this book that I'm not even going to approach. I'm not even going to get near, because if you haven't read it, it needs to remain a surprise for sure. I literally was finishing this in the car in a road trip. I was on like the last page back here, and it was a full body reaction. I gasped so loudly. I had to put the book down for a second to collect my thoughts in that moment. It was a surprise for sure, and I love that feeling. There's truly nothing better than getting so surprised in a book with a significant twist, and this one fully delivered. So I rated this a 4.75, and it was really close to being a 5-star. And I remember processing it a little bit with my husband and going back and forth on if it should be a 4.75 or if it should be a 5. And I let it sit for a couple days, and I didn't really think about it a bunch after I finished the book. I wasn't obsessing over it. I wasn't Googling it. I wasn't looking at trivia. I wasn't thinking about the characters. And that really is the difference in a 5-star for me, is if it really, really sticks with you after you've read it. And this one didn't, but not in a bad way. It just was very easy to move on from. So this is a 4.75. Silent Patient, highly recommend if there are any mystery psychological thriller lovers out there. And if you've read it, right? Gosh. The next book that I read was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. You might recognize this title because I think his Apple TV Plus had a show that was airing based off of the book Dark Matter very recently. I did not watch the show. I don't think I intend to watch the show after reading the book. This is a multiverse book. If you're not really into the sci-fi multiverse, anything can happen, time travel type thing, this might not be the book for you. But if you are, you should pick it up. This was a really quick and easy read. It kind of reminded me of The Martian by Andy Weir, just in pace and how like easy it is to read, if that makes sense. Because both of those books, The Martian and Dark Matter, deal with a lot of science, a lot of really technical and confusing concepts, but for some reason, Blake Crouch and Andy Weir actually make it really easy to read. This was a super fast read. You could read this in a day if you really wanted to. It's not super long. The chapters are really short, so it just feels like it kind of flies by. But basically, we follow Jason, who one day wakes up in a world that is not his own, but everybody recognizes him and everybody knows who he is, and he is this revered scientist that's been working on a multiverse traveler. And so this Jason that we're following suddenly realizes, oh crap, I am not in my universe. My entire life is in a different universe and I have to get back to it. So that is basically the gist of the story. Is it's a journey. It's him going on a journey, trying to find his family, trying to find his original universe, with a lot of science thrown in there and a lot of theoretical universe stuff that is way above my head. This book, I had heard a lot of good things about it. I know people that have read it that absolutely love it, and I just don't think it was maybe my cup of tea. It was really dark and really sad for most of the book. You know, when you're just reading a book that is completely hopeless for 90% of it, and by the end of it, even if it's a happy ending, you're just emotionally exhausted because it was so draining. That was this book. At the end of it, I was definitely ready to be done with it. I don't think that the characters were very likable, especially Jason himself. In a plot like this and a book like this, there is no opportunity for character development because he's just trying to accomplish one single thing, and he doesn't really grow as a character because he's just trying to get from point A to point B, and that is what the book is. And I've definitely realized in the last couple of years that I am way more of a character reader than a plot reader. So if a book has a stellar plot but the characters are pretty flat, I will not enjoy it as much. I know that that's not the case for everybody, and some people are way more plot readers than they are character readers, and that's totally fine. That's the beauty of reading and personal tastes. But in a book like this that is very heavily plot driven and not character driven, I just naturally don't gravitate towards it as much. I truly think that that is just a personal preference thing. I don't think this is a bad book. I think that there are a lot of people that this is the type of book that they want to read. So don't write it off just because I didn't necessarily enjoy it. If it sounds interesting to you, you should definitely give it a try. I rated this a 3-star because, again, I know it's a good book. It's just not my book. So 3 stars, Dark Matter. Moving on. The next book I read was called The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard. This was a book of the month pick relatively recently, and it also was a pretty book cover pick. I love choosing a book by its cover, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, I would say that it worked out. I would also kind of call this a science fiction book because it deals with time travel. We are somewhere in France. It is not specified, and I think it is a fictional village in France. It's also a very ambiguous timeline. If I had to guess, I would think that we're somewhere between the 1920s and 1940s, perhaps. We're in France. There is a series of towns that neighbor each other going around in a circle around a lake. And each town is actually in a different time period. So the town that we are in, from the reader's perspective, is patient 0. And if you go to the west of you, you are actually going 20 years into the past of the same town. If you traveled to the eastern border, you're going 20 years into the future of the same town. All of the townspeople know that this is the way of life. They know about the borders. They know about the time changes. There's a council of people in each town that keep the order of things. People in the towns can request the council to go and visit for essentially 24 hours one of the neighboring villages. They can't go past that because in theory these towns go, we're 40 years, we're 60 years, we're 80 years in either direction. But they can go one town to the left or one town to the right if it is approved by the council. Stick with me here. Some of the reasons that people would request to visit one of the towns is if there was a death in their family and they wanted to go 20 years into the past to be able to see them one more time before they died. Or another example is there's an old man whose daughter is pregnant, but he knows he's not going to live long enough to be able to see his grandchild. So he requests to go 20 years into the future to see his grandchild one time before he dies. When you visit these neighboring towns, you are completely decked out in black. You are wearing masks. You cannot interact with anybody because it could trip up the timeline. So people see that there is somebody visiting either from the past or the future, but you are not allowed to talk to them. You are not allowed to have your identity revealed. You are just allowed to observe. So we follow our main character, Odile, in our town, in our timeline, who witnesses one of these visitors coming from the future. And she realizes that they are coming to visit their son, whom she's friends with, and comes to the conclusion that her friend is going to die. And now she knows he's going to die because she saw his parents come and visit him in her town, which kind of kickstarts an existential crisis with her. That's like, do I try to save this boy's life? I know that the timeline is important and the butterfly effect is real, so I don't want to mess with it, but is it ethical to stand back and do nothing, or or is it my job to interfere and save this guy's life? And we follow Odile through this moral dilemma. We read about how her relationship with this boy grows and her entering adulthood and trying to figure out who she is as a person. And it's a very kind of coming of age book, while also interspersed with, I don't know if it's magical realism, I don't know if it's sci-fi, but it's just a little bit of a twist of whimsy in it. And the plot kind of sounds technical and a little bit complicated, but actually this book was a very relaxing, slow read. Not slow in a way that it was difficult or dragged on, but slow in that it just, this is a strange way to describe it, but it was a very peaceful read. It felt cozy, actually. And I really, really enjoyed it. I think that the plot premise is super unique. And I loved that. It's short, it's easy, it's fast. The ending is very, very satisfying. It just ends in a spot that makes me think back on this book really fondly. So I rated this a 4 stars out of 5. And the reason that it's not higher is, again, I'm a character reader, and our main character Odile personally wasn't very likable to me. She had a lot of growth and development in the plot, but it didn't feel like she was consciously making a decision or trying to better herself. It felt like she was just reacting to things that were happening to her, and because of that, I found myself getting pretty frustrated with her. I'm not sure if that's what the author intended. I think you're supposed to connect with her, and I think you're supposed to like her. There were times when I did, but I did struggle a little bit just with her as a character, but the setting and the side characters and the plot itself is so beautifully written and artistic that I still really enjoyed it and rated it a 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, if you have watched my last video, you'll know that I recently finished all of Emily Henry's adult romance books, and I ranked them all and gave very long, opinionated reviews in great detail on each of her books. The next 2 books that I read was People We Meet on Vacation and Happy Place, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about them just because I have spent a lot of time talking about these books. So if you want to hear my very unfiltered, in-depth reviews and opinions about these books, I will link my last video in the description where I rank all of Emily Henry's books. But for all intents and purposes, I gave People We Meet on Vacation a 3 out of 5 star. It is my least favorite Emily Henry book, and I was generally all around disappointed with it. And I gave Happy Place 5 out of 5 stars. This book greatly surprised me. I didn't think that I was gonna like it hardly at all because it's not the type of plot premise that I usually go for. I don't usually go for a second chance romance, but this book is really good. So 5 out of 5 stars. Moving on. The next book that I read was on Kindle, and it is the 4th book in the Lovelight Farms romance series by B.K. Borison, and it is called Business Casual, and it is really, really sweet. Lovelight Farms is definitely just a cozy, romantic series that you can read at any time. Each book can actually be read out of order. You don't have to read it sequentially because it follows a different couple in every book, but it just takes place in the same town, in the same timeline, and all of the characters are friends. This is the last installment of the Lovelight Farms series, and it follows Nova and Charlie as they slowly fall in love. This was actually really interesting because it is a grumpy sunshine trope, but the girl is grumpy and the guy is sunshine. I don't know if I've ever read that before, and that was kind of fun. Nova is a tattoo artist that's working on opening her tattoo shop, and Charlie is a finance guy that actually lives in New York, but he is related to one of the other characters in the series, and he loves going to this town. He loves going to Lovelight Farms. He feels like he belongs there, but at the same time, he feels like he's an outsider because he doesn't live there, but he wants to really badly. So him and Nova kind of strike up a friendship, kind of strike up a friends with benefits relationship, and then they just fall in love and everything's happy and beautiful, and it's just a great time. I would recommend the Lovelight Farms series if you just need a cozy romance book that's easy, it's not stressful, it's just something that gives you warm fuzzy feelings and is really fun to read. So I rated it a 4 out of 5 stars. In the series as a whole, I would say that it's probably my second favorite book out of all 4 of them. That's Business Casual. And then the next book I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry, and once again, I am not gonna go in great detail about this book just because I have. If you wanna hear my opinions on it, you can go watch my last video where I rank all of Emily Henry's books, but I love Beach Read. It's the first Emily Henry book I ever read. I read it years ago, and this was actually a reread, kind of to see if I liked it as much as I did the first time. The first time I read it, I rated it a 5-star. This time I rated it a 4.5 star because I am obnoxiously specific. It is still a great book. It's my second favorite Emily Henry book. I love the characters. This is traditional Grumpy Sunshine, which is, you know, the guy is super grumpy and the girl is more sunshiny. It's really sweet, and I'm a big fan of it, and this book feels like Emily Henry wrote it for other writers out there, which is very sweet, and I appreciate that she's kind of reaching that audience as well. And it takes place in Michigan, and I love the setting, and great banter. It's funny, it's heartfelt. 4.5 stars. I've been trying to film this section for so long, and you're being so loud. Okay, go lay down. And the last book that I read in July was also a Kindle read. I don't have the physical copy, but it was A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. You might be familiar with her because she also wrote The 7-Year Slip, which people just absolutely love. I read The 7-Year Slip a couple months ago, mainly because I wanted to see what the hype was about, what everybody was freaking out about, and it was a good book. I would not say that it was totally deserving of the hype, in my opinion. I was a bit disappointed in it just because of what I had heard from people. There were a lot of people that were saying it was their favorite book of 2023. It was just good to me. It was sweet, it was easy. I don't think I loved the direction that it ultimately ended up going in, but I did give it a 4 out of 5 star. I was very interested though to read A Novel Love Story, which is brand new. It just came out, mainly because I liked her writing style a lot. I liked Ashley Poston's writing style. I just didn't love the premise of the last book, but when I read the premise of this one, I was very interested because it just sounded more fun to me. So we're following Eileen, who goes by Elsie, and she is going through a bit of a rough patch when we pick up with her. She broke up with her fiance 3 years ago, but it was a really, really tough breakup. He broke up with her a week before their wedding, and she had a really hard time recovering from it. Her confidence was totally shattered. She kind of became a recluse and turned to reading books, specifically romance novels, to sort of get through that time. So we pick up, and Eileen is driving to a cabin to meet her book club members, and they're just gonna have a week of reading books and talking about them and relaxing and having fun, and she's been looking forward to this week for so long, but suddenly she's driving around and she's lost, and her phone isn't working, and she can't get her GPS to pull up in her car, and it's raining, and she's getting very stressed out that she will not be able to find this cabin. And then all of a sudden she almost hits a man with her car. Turns out he was standing in the middle of the road while it was dark and raining, but she almost hits him with her car. Through a series of events, she realizes that she is in this town, this cute little quaint town, and she has no cell reception, and her car breaks down, and she realizes that she's stuck. But here's the twist. The town is actually not a real place. It is a magical town, and it is the setting of her all-time favorite romance books. So she is suddenly basically caught in a book that she knows very well and that she loves. So she's spending time in this town, and she's meeting characters that she has read their story. She knows them. She knows how they got together with their partner. She knows the businesses that they run. She knows things about their childhood because she has read these books countless times because they helped her get through her breakup. But she's stuck in this town, and she doesn't know why, and she can't get out because her car is broken down. So she meets the bookshop owner, whose name is Anderson, but sometimes he goes by Anders and sometimes he goes by Andy, and it was a little bit confusing, but we'll call him Anders for our purposes here. She meets Anders, who is grumpy, and she is sunshine. We're back, folks. And she starts to realize that Anders is actually aware that he lives in a fictional town and that all of the characters are not real characters. He is the only one, in fact, that is aware of this truth. Everybody else thinks that they are real and that their town is real. So that's the plot setup. and I loved where we were going, and then we started to go downhill. Now, magical realism books and these kind of cozy fantasy books, one of the things about them is that the magic system, the world, the why behind the what is never really explained to the reader. You're just kind of accepting the truths as fact. I'm okay with that. There's a lot of scenarios in books like these where I don't really need to know the background. I don't really need to know why there is a magical fictional town that is set up, why our main character is the only one that can see it, why there's no cell reception there. I don't need to, because in a story like this, it doesn't actually really further the plot. You just accept it as a truth and you move on with the story. In this case though, I feel like I wanted a little bit of an explanation, which is not totally normal for me. I think Anders himself, our main male character, was very two-dimensional. We don't learn hardly anything about him, but we are watching our main female character, Elsie, just fall head over heels in love with him, and it felt very undeserved and unearned, and there would be moments where they are having a moment, and I just would set the book down and be very confused, honestly, because it just felt forced. I don't think that the pacing of their relationship made a lot of sense. I really didn't like the ending. I'm not gonna spoil it, there's an abrupt thing that happens that is very confusing for me and disappointing, but then it kind of like ends and wraps everything up in a pretty bow, like super fast. The ending is really, really rushed, and maybe that was why I was getting whiplash in some parts. Also, I actually think that the editing was bad. I'm not sure why, but it just seemed like there were mistakes in this book, and it felt a little bit sloppy, a little bit lazy writing, and I was really disappointed in it. At the beginning, we were on the trajectory of a solid 4-star read, and then as soon as things kind of started to go downhill, I was pretty settled that this was going to be a 3-star, maybe 3.5, but just pretty middle of the road mediocre. And then the ending was so rushed that it legitimately knocked it down to 2.5. Feels really harsh, so I'm gonna say a 2.75 for a novel love story. And this was a big disappointment for me because I did enjoy The 7-Year Slip. I really like her writing style. It's very artistic and romantic and poetic at some points. You can really find yourself as a reader in an individual sentence in a lot of the things that she does, but her actual stories and plots feel a bit loose, and I'm sad about it. This was not the best way to wrap up July, but it's over, it's done. I read 6 books in June and 3 books in July, and didn't have any 5-star reads, and had some pretty low points, honestly. But at the same time, I really had a fun reading month. I stepped outside of the boundaries for some of the genres that I typically read. Yeah, so that's kind of my mid-summer reading wrap up, and I'm excited for August. I have a list of books that I'm kind of ready to jump into. July was a really slow month for me. I think I got into a bit of a reading slump, but also it felt good to take a break, and I feel more refreshed and ready to jump into August at pretty high speed. Lastly, before signing off, I just want to say welcome to a lot of the new faces here. I started this channel as just a way to talk about books that I love. It's really just a creative outlet for me, and my hope was that I could find people to talk about books with. All of a sudden, there are a lot of new faces around here, and I'm really grateful and thankful that you're here and watching these videos, and I'm excited to continue to talk about books until I die. So see you next time.